Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new discussion on Podcasters Unleashed. I'm your host, Hawla, today, and I'm from the podcast Women's Stories. And today we're going to talk about injustice and corruption and what's behind it. I chose this topic because corruption could affect us in many ways. It could affect us, our livelihood, our health, our freedom, and even our life. And I want to reach out to the audience first and want to know you who is watching us right now, how do you feel about injustice or corruption in general? And if you have been in a situation where you got robbed or you've been ripped off by the government, how would you react? So join the discussion and comment down below. But before reading our audience comments, I want to present my co-host, Simon.
Hi, I'm Simon. My podcast, I have two podcasts. The first one's Taxis Chronicled, where I'm driving around London interviewing people and they're giving their real life stories from a wide range of things, some heartache, some happy. And my other podcast is Africa Investor Stories from people around the world again who have invested in Africa and they're sharing their experience of what it's really like. So if you want to hear a good podcast along those line of things, feel free to find us on all the major platforms.
Over to you, Carla.
Hi, I'm Carla and I'm the host of the Wonder and Wellbeing podcast, which is all about well-being and education, and it's for parents and teachers of kids between the ages of 5 and 14 years old.
Thank Carla. Over to you, lovely Matilda.
And hello everyone, I'm Matilda, host of Coffee with Matilda, a journey to self. And my podcast is about finding yourself, discovering, and self-love.
Thanks, Matilda. Now Victor is joining us. So Victor, could you introduce yourself, please?
Oh, hi, I'm Victor, the host of the Diaspora Entrepreneurs podcast. And where we talk about all things Africans and Caribbeans who wants to live a lifestyle of freedom to move towards a better lifestyle anyways.
Thank you, Victor. So I want to, before beginning deep in the discussion, we want just to define corruption. And I want to go over to you, Carla. How do you define corruption, and does it really relate to injustice too?
Yeah, well, you know what? Corruption, it sounds like it's complex and we kind of see it in a complex way, but it's actually not that complex. And we all pretty much know what it is. And basically, it's any form of dishonesty or misuse of the position of power or authority for your own private gain or for the gain of the group or the association that you affiliate with. That's it, plain and simple. And it does relate to justice and injustice in the sense that justice it's innate. We all know as human beings what's fair, and we relate the concept of justice to what's fair to all human beings. And if you are breaching what is fair, what's the God-given right of every human being in terms of fairness, then you're being unjust. And usually corruption will leave somebody without their rights met, and it will take away those rights in the interest of other people. And so, yes, that's how they interact with each other quite closely. Injustice, justice, and corruption. They're all related to one another.
Yeah. Well, Matilda, you are in the law field, so could you speak to that?
Well, I believe, and I think that's how it's defined, corruption is related to what's illegal for that system. Legally, it's not aligned. So what's corruption in one country might not be necessary corruption for another country. Now, justice and injustice is more related to morality, and it's more universal concept to it. And we can define how religion, for example, changed our concept of justice. But corruption, in Western world, for example, a lot of things can be looked at corrupted in Middle East, but not necessarily it's corruption in that country. And I can give you an example. For example, even Iran, because I'm Iranian and Armenian, so I can give you example of both countries. In Iran, if a woman is an amazing mother, but is in an abusive relationship and has a terrible husband, And the husband, I don't know, even is a killer, is in the jail. If you get divorced, if you want to get divorced from your husband, your child automatically goes to the father, and if the father is not present, it goes to the family of the father. So that means your father-in-law, and the mom doesn't have the right. Is this corruption? Well, by Iranian law, Sharia, it's not corruption, but for Western eyes, this is corruption. Or a man can forbid you, the husband can forbid you to leave the country, can take your passport for a lot of standards. Right now we're talking, it's a woman in International Women's Day. A lot of standards is wrong, but is it corruption? Then it's a questionable. Or in Saudi, if someone steals money, they can cut off your hand. It's not corruption. But for that country, but for Western world, it is like, wow, excuse me, what? Or even homosexuals, they can kill you if police catches you in Saudi or in Iran as a homosexual. They can kill you. It's not corruption. They can put you in jail. That's not corruption, because by law they are allowed. So justice and corruption can come to a certain point and becomes, the definition changes. I just want listeners to understand that slight definition, because then gives a different meaning to it totally.
Okay. And I want to ask you this question because you brought the topic corruption and law in different countries, where now you have lived a lot in the Western countries. And I want to know, have you sensed that there is corruption in the system, or there is a bad side of the system?
I think there is corruption in every system. There are loopholes, and a lot of people they are smart, and we can talk about it. Why even corruption exists? They can use these loopholes to benefit more or to suppress certain people, minorities. So we can talk about it later if when in the detail.
Yeah.
So, but I don't believe there is a country that there is no corruption.
Okay. Well, we'll get back to you, Matilda. I want to go to Victor because I want to go back to the topic of the corruption again, because now we are losing billions from corruption. This money, we could use it to improve opportunities for people and improve communities. So how do you feel about corruption, Victor?
Well, yeah, thank you, Carla. Since according to what's it called, Transparency International, I am from, according to them, I'm from one of the most corrupt country in the world, according to them. You get so, but if we go by the definition, or if you understand what's actually going on by checking out different type of medias, you know that what Matilda just said is correct. There's no country in the world that has no corruption. So, but I know Carla has clearly defined what corruption is, but to me, corruption has two. See, in different parts of the world, corruption is being named different things. So, for me, I see a clear distinction between being corrupt and not being corrupt. Where I'm from, corruption is killing people every day because of the bad roads, because of electricity. We have to be our own government to provide these things for ourselves. So these are the effects of corruption. So I terribly do not like corruption. That is why many Africans, no, many Nigerians are moving away from Nigeria because of corruption. And it is it's in the system because it's just pure bribery. You get while mentioning bribery, I saw something that is like um which is gonna butter my point just a little bit because bribery and lobbying in Nigeria or in African countries we call them bribery, while in the US and the UK or Western countries they call them lobbying because they are more organized and on a higher level You get why in the African countries they are not organized. So you can bribe a policeman, you can tip a custom officer, you can tip a contractor. A contractor can use an inferior material, and the auditor will come in and just like tick it. Yeah, it passed through the right what's it called? It passed through the right the critical checks. So, and in say 2 years time, you see if it's a building, you see the building coming down, and people can be killed. So these are the effects of corruption. This is why you don't really want to joke with corruption. But the biggest one is lobbying, because lobbyists can take they can lobby a government or they can lobby government to create a policy that is going to like affect a whole community for 50, 60, 100 years. So that is why both of them, bribery and corruption, they are of the same cloth. They are from the same mother. No, bribery and lobbying, they are from the same mother called corruption, in my opinion.
Okay, Victor. It's interesting what you said, because the term of corruption is different in every country. And you said that the corruption is integrated in the system. I want to go to Simon, and I want to ask you, do you think that corruption is inevitable? Can we avoid corruption?
Before I answer that, I just want to comment on something that Matilda was saying. Some of her points of view I don't agree with. You've got the difference where you've got law, and law is based on the culture. So if you have a culture, whether you want to call it archaic or not, but if that's the culture and that's their law, that's not corruption. Corruption is what I would argue is what Victor was saying, and Carla was saying about where it's something for something to get you up, and when you should be actually supporting society or group of people in that case. But in answer to your question, no, you can't totally have a society without corruption, because it's just like crime. Crime will always be there. You can limit. You have to adjust the laws. And sadly, the people who go to school, let's say if we look at England's case, most of the people who are in top power of echelons, MPs, all went to Eton. That's a problem. That's a major, major problem. That's why our society, we've gone from having free school dinners, free education, free stationery, free youth clubs, and so many things, they're having to pay for everything, paying for higher education, paying for dental treatment, even though the population's growing and the country's got wealthier. But the people who are supporting them in those cases are their friends, because also politicians are funded by big business, and then on top of that, they go and do talks for £500,000, £1 million, and then they make a decision invested in the interest of the big business. Now, if I was to pay you $2 million, but you're meant to look after the people's interests, you've got to be a strong person, like Gandhi said. When he liberated India from the British, and they asked him to be the leader, he said no, because there will be a time where he will have to make a decision. It will either be in his interest or the people's interest. And he's not strong enough to say he can make it in the people's interest. But yeah, corruption will never totally go. You can limit it, and you can adjust the laws. In the sense of England, I would say, or countries in general, what you need to do is you need to stop private financing for politicians for re-election. Yeah, straight away they're not owed in. It's like being indebted to the mafia. If you remove that, then you've defeated a certain amount of corruption that would work for the public interest, or against the public interest, sorry, in that line of things. But yeah, I don't want to take up your whole show. I could talk on this page.
Before talking to Carla and Matilda, we want to read some comments. Carla?
Yeah, we've got this comment from Sasha, who says, very interesting, Matilda. I think that's in relation to Matilda's explanation from a legal perspective. Nelson says, what can we as regular people do to stop or mitigate corruption? And I know that you're going to talk about this later on, so watch out for that, Nelson. We're going to talk about solutions later on in the show. Sasha also says, Victor, you said you are living in the most corrupted country in the world. It means you are living in Europe. So I think he's having a little bit of a joke there. I think he's arguing with you, Victor, that actually Europe is more corrupt than your country, despite what your source says. And Frederick says, just look at our last election. I think this was for you also, Victor. This came in when you were talking about your country. And he's mentioning there about term limits in relation to corruption in the last election. Back to you, Howla.
Thanks, Carla. I want to go to Matilda. She wants to say something related to Simon's.
Yeah, I was thinking one of the ways that maybe we can limit corruption is by creating more middle class. When you look at all different countries, when there is no middle class, there is more corruption. And why? Maybe we need to understand the need underneath of corruption is survival. And we will, this has, look at human history, all these societies, all these governments throughout thousands of years, is the need for survival. And even animal kingdom, we need to understand what it is. So if we don't give the middle class enough power and comfort, then there will be corruption. There is no, even if we don't give money to the politicians, we will have corruption. So in my opinion, the middle class is the winning chip for us to have a better society, for a more balanced society.
Yeah.
And just to jump in there, Howla, if you look at history, we've gone from small groups of tribes of people to massive nations. Where you have a small group or tribe of people, it's very hard to be corrupt because you're answerable. The people can see what's going on. But where you've got massive nations, yeah, that's where you get major issues. And I agree with what Matilda's saying also, but what you really do need to do, and they talk about this on LBC radio, is you need more representation of the class is on the mass of the people. So let's say we're 80% working class in England. We need 80% of those, 80% of people in politics must be from a working class background and have gone to state school, and only 1% from Eton. Do you see what I mean? Because then, if there is corruption, it's harder and it's getting spread out because people don't know people. But when everybody knows everybody and it's a small niche of people, yeah, away from going to the one world order kind of thing, it's easy. It's very, very easy. And if we really, really want to look at corruption, we could look at how the Western countries hold the third world countries and try and keep them poor.
Hold on that thought, Simon, because I think Carla, she has prepared for us a research about the form of governments and how it's related to corruption and injustice. And maybe she has a really strong point to talk about that. Carla, over to you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's interesting that Simon mentioned there about the point of the shift from tribes and smaller communities where people were held accountable in their form of rulership to nations where it's really, really challenging to hold people accountable. And I think that's what we see mostly in the world today. Actually, I did a little bit of research about types of government and how corruption relates to that. And one of the sources that I found talked about 10 forms of government. And I think this is really important because Matilda also touched on this. If you don't know what type of government rules your country, then you really don't understand what you're dealing with. And so these were the 10 forms of government that came up when I did my research. There's democracy, communism, socialism, oligarchy, aristocracy, monarchy, theocracy, colonialism, totalitarianism, and military dictatorship. And that was really interesting because as I was looking at that, I was thinking about all the different periods in history and how corruption has manifested itself in different societies right down to our modern era, and how those different forms of government had a role to play in that. And what I also looked at one of the most famous resources that people study when they're looking at politics and they're learning about governance and how governance works. And it was Plato's Republic, where he he looks actually at 5 types of government. He looks at aristocracy, timocracy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny. And he puts them each one in the form of a man. And he tries to get you to understand what each of those governments would look like in relation to a human being, or how that human being would act if they were a government. And I thought that's quite interesting. But the most interesting thing about Plato's Republic is that he argues that as humans progress from aristocracy to timocracy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny, they're reducing the quality of their government. So he argues that the best form is aristocracy, but there are certain conditions that would need to be met for the aristocracy to be effective as a government, i.e. free of corruption and injustice. And if those conditions are not met, then what happens is aristocracy it degenerates into a timocracy. And then if the conditions are not met there, it degenerates again into oligarchy. And these are terms, actually, oligarchy is a term that we hear in the modern era. And then, ironically, what was even more interesting is we often advocate for a type of government that we call democracy. And this is kind of hailed up as the model. But actually, according to Plato's Republic, democracy was a sign that we'd already dropped 3 or 4 levels away from the ideal form of government. And what came after that, in his argument, was tyranny. And that's another thing that we've had argued today, that if we don't deal with the problems that we see in society today, we're going to degenerate into a tyranny. And actually, I don't know if these people who say this are looking at Plato's Republic as their justification for that. But there is an argument, a valid argument for proper forms of government that are rooted in what is called wisdom, rather than human knowledge, which is what we see governments rooted in today. They should be rooted in timeless and universal wisdom. Matilda mentioned about morality, and morality kind of connects to universal wisdom, or that which humans know innately to be a purer form of governance. And I suppose that relates also to another thing that we've heard in the modern era that's being threatened, which is the right to govern oneself, or the internal government and the knowledge within oneself to know what is universally right, not only for you, but for your fellow man. So yeah, that's what I found in terms of research. It was quite deep, but I would ask for anybody who wants to know more about governments and types of governments to do their own research, and feel free to drop your questions here for us and we can answer them specifically. But yeah, it was a lot of research this week on types of government. Back to you, Howla.
That's interesting, Carla. Victor, I want to get back to you. And do you think that democracy could still exist in some countries?
Yeah, thank you, Carla. I think what the type of governments that Carla just mentioned now is kind of is very revealing, because I know that in the core African settings before the colonial times and the bastardization of our ruling class, even back then, there's still corruption, and the different forms of cronyism, where you pick someone just because they look beautiful, or because he or she is a friend of a friend that has access to the throne of power.
Mm.
So you just you bequeath that thing to them. So, but when it comes to democracy right now, I think democracy is still it's a disguised form of aristocrat. No, how do you say of aristocracy? It's a disguised form of it, because now cronyism. Go to Whitehall right now. All the eating boys are there. So without proper regards for qualifications, or who is capable of performing a task, you hear different corruption talk on the House of Parliament in London, where you see people who are not fit for the job. A pub owner getting a contract for medical equipment. Yeah, so cronyism is still going to be there within democratic settings. So because whoever is in power, it's like winner have it all. So whoever is in power would still attract people who wants to feed from them because of sponsorship and all those kind of stuff. But democracy, to me, democracy shouldn't be a blanket, shouldn't be a blanket type of government that is being rolled out, or that we've been made to understand. Because when I was doing some research regards this, so I started looking at how many the countries that has where people have the highest level of confidence on their government. Funny enough, it's in China. 83% of the Chinese populace, they have confidence in their government. While countries like France, they're number 5 with 50% of their citizens. The UK is number 8, 45%. The US is 42%. So rolling out, say, blanket statement that democracy is the way out, should be really looked out.
Yeah, you're not sure about it. Yeah, maybe
no, I'm not sure about
we will talk about it with Matilda with the Hunger and Power. Yes, Carla.
Yeah, and what Victor mentions there about democracy and the idea of voting for one's leaders or one's decision makers is one of the flaws, actually, of democracy. Because people don't actually know what the process is quite often. And there are so many areas where corruption can leak in. That's why in Plato's Republic, democracy was claimed to be one step away from tyranny, because it was a sign that society had descended so far away from the ideal government that it was just about to collapse altogether. And the only way to bring it back, according to Plato's Republic, was to go to a tyranny, so that people can see what happens when you distribute leadership, or you supposedly distribute leadership across a wide number of people that are supposed to represent the people. It's a very flawed concept according to the evidence globally, and not just now. The issues that we see now, where we talk about the flaws in democracy and cheating in elections and all of that, we think it's new because we've only lived now. But if you look at human history, it's never been seen as an effective form of government, because it's just so hard to manage and regulate it and to know what's really going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Exactly, and we have a comment from Frederick, and he had the same idea as yours. He said that corruption has changed now. It's used to be limited to the people in government. Now, with media companies and internet sites acting as censor on the information that is available to the general public, look at the way Facebook, Twitter, Google throw the information that was damaging to a certain political party. They are part of the problem now. So now also the high-tech companies are a part of the corruption.
Yeah.
Yes, Simon.
Oh, sorry. No, there's another. I thought Carla was going to read out Sasha.
Yeah, Sasha says determinism is the base of the philosophy. Freedom is related to energy and resources, and due to future problems of energy and climate change, we'll forget the democracy soon. And the balance of power is a reality, and it's far from self-conviction. Frederick says the US is a constitutional republic, not a democratic. And this is very interesting. Thank you for that, Frederick, because actually a lot of Americans are continually, not only are they arguing that their government is democratic, but they are lobbying for democratic governments all over the world in other people's countries, under the impression that they themselves have a model of democracy that is actually effective, which is very interesting.
What I'm going to say is there's an South American Amazon tribe, and where they vote, because they're a small group of people, they just go and stand behind the person that they want. And it's very simple and very open. And any major decisions, yeah, they have their same agreement system of working out who agrees and who doesn't agree. And then that is how they can keep on top of what's really happening in their community. And obviously, we don't have that. But then in relation to what Carla was saying about all these different political systems, which I've heard of some of them, I didn't know all of all of them, is that I would say it depends on where we are in history. Because if we're fighting, then sometimes you need dictatorship or some military thing, and then that's other times you may need a different system. But the problem is we just believe we should stick with one system throughout, which I personally don't think that's the wise thing. And in also speaking about corruption, where you were speaking to Victor, we speak about the higher echelons of corruption. But I always say this, from my experience, from what I've seen, especially when I was traveling around the world, the government set the principle. So one country I was in, which I won't mention, basically the president said, I'm going to get mine, so you better get yours. Yeah. And that set a standard. Now that country's got so much corruption that, and when statistically, when they look at the main bits of corruption, it's regarding the civil servant. Because whether you have an NGO who's like giving free medical care, a woman can bring her baby in the middle of the night and she knows it's meant to be free because let's say it's an American NGO or whoever, but the doctor will say, no, you've got to give me money. And that's a prime example of the difference between the corruption in England or Europe, in places in Europe, I say Western Europe, I can't talk for the Eastern Europe, so I've heard what they're complaining about, and corruption in certain places in the other places in the world. When I call the police, I don't have to pay for the police to turn up. Do you understand? If someone crashes into my car, I don't have to race to pay the police first, so I don't get the blame and taken away. And do you understand? So the list, it goes on and goes on and goes on. If I want to get my driving license, I don't have to pay the man behind the counter extra. So there are different levels of corruption, as what China did. And I'm a big fan of capital punishment in certain things. Yeah. And China came up with a policy that they don't care who you are, you will, to stump out a certain element of corruption, you'll go to jail. Then the big oligarch kind of people were paying off people. Then they said, okay, we'll execute people. They execute their first person, corruption dropped overnight. Boom. It didn't flat out go, but it dropped drastically. People knew where they stood. So I think at times you need to get people on board. And just like Genghis Khan, when he's bringing in paper money, he said, this is when they came with their goods and he gave them paper money and they said, no, I don't want that. He said, you sure? I said, yes, no. I said, all right, and chop his head off. The next man goes, I'll take it. That's how you get people on board. Very simple. You have some drastic things. You obviously can't do that all the time. At times you need to regulate the system. And I believe we need to purge our system right now. I'm afraid I will.
I just want to make sure that, Simon, you don't get elected for England.
Right, if he did, it'll be a lot better, I'll tell you that. Yeah, it's clear up the place. There wouldn't be no paedophiles in jail, I'll tell you that for a start.
Hold on, Simon. Guys, I have very interesting questions came up. What causes corruption? Who wants to answer that?
Greed.
Or what's behind it?
Greed. It's greed and selfishness. Think about it. If you teach the new, sorry, Matilda, if you teach the new generation about self-values and what that China have right now with the unity, and it's like that, it's like an ant mentality where it's all about the community, the better for the people, then you're not going to get so much corruption. Do you understand? I'll give you one prime example, then I'll let you go on to Matilda. China has been building railways in different places around the world. They're doing a massive infrastructure project. They built this railway in a country in Africa. This country, some of the locals were stealing the railway tracks, the lines, while the trains are still running, to go and make money on scrap metal. Even though they know their countrymen is coming along the train will crash and die, and if they don't crash and die, they're in the middle of the savannah where their lions are. And the Chinese woman turned around and said, I don't understand this. Even if she couldn't understand. She said, this is a national pride. It builds your economy. It's your fellow person. How can you behave like that? But the people, obviously, who are doing it, they don't have a sense of national pride. It's not about money. It's not about poverty, because people have been living, they've been living from babies up until this point. So it's greed. But go on, Matilda.
Yeah, Simon, I see that is, I understand the point, but stealing railway lines, it's almost impossible.
What do you mean?
Because I've worked on
You know, I'm talking the gauge tracks. The gauge tracks. You can unbolt them. Yeah, why can't you? Of course you can.
See, it takes cranes to like drop it there, so it is very,
No,
very
not
heavy.
your hip. Come on now, Victor. When you lay those tracks, they laid it by hand. Yeah,
Simon,
those big 18 bolts.
Hold on. Let Victor finish his sentence.
I work on the rail sector.
Yep, go on.
Yeah, I work on the rail sector, so those keying in and those pulling out, I can do them. But the actual rolling stock, the actual lines, it is bloody heavy. It takes actual proper crane to like move them.
One metal segment.
Yeah.
I don't know how they're doing it, but they're doing it.
So there must be some. Anyways,
well, guys, we'll get back to the discussion.
To answer your point, what causes corruption? To me, is it's insecurity, uncertainty, fear. So when I mean insecurity, your job is not guaranteed. If you are a service, what's it called? A civil servant, your job is not guaranteed. Number two, your payment is uncertain. And number three is fear. You get? So these are some of the things that I think causes corruption, because you just want that quick bribe here. You just want that backhand here. You get? So if you're going to, instead of say you're going for your driver's license and you need to do the theory and the practical, they just said, okay, you can do the practical, but just tick here, give me so and so, and if you can move the car back and forth, then you're good, because they know that at the end of the day, nobody's going to check it. So you have your license, you're gone. But we'll talk about the solutions later. Yeah. So, but is the great stuff.
Think of the logic of that, though, Victor. You give a license to somebody, they get in the car and go and run over your child. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. See.
Just because they can go back and forth.
They don't really care, Simon.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Guys, we have comments from the audience.
It is a huge disconnect. It is a huge disconnect because mine is different from ours. I can take care of mine, but when it comes to ours, if it's the government thing, you don't. It's not directly, even though it affects you daily, but it doesn't really. It's not your problem. So long as the government is issuing it, it's not your problem. But if it's yours, you take care of it. So it's the fear of what has the government done for me lately? What has my company done for me lately? But it still affects you. So that's why I'll keep down until we start talking about something else.
Okay. We have got comments. Carla, go ahead.
We've got a comment here from Nelson. Nelson says, China, ? That is ground zero for corruption. They've got it down to a science. Well,
Americans.
Well, it depends what corruption is according to that government, as Matilda told us at the beginning. Frederick says, and yet we have members of our government engaging in backroom deals, both Republicans and Democrats, with the same folks who wrote the book. And we've also got Nelson who says, Now, there's very different levels of corruption. In China, it's high level. And that specific African nation example, which Victor was talking about, it's poverty, which makes fertile grounds for corruption. And before I pass back to you, Howler, I do want to talk about, there is a formula, and this was quite interesting for me to find. There's a formula according to, there's a researcher called Klitgard, I hope I'm saying his name correctly, that argued that there's a formula that you would be able to know when a nation was prone to corruption. And basically, the degree of corruption is related to how much of a monopoly you have, how much discretion there is within that monopoly to protect the interests of the group or of each other, like what Victor was just saying. And where you remove transparency, or the lower the level of transparency and the lower the level of morality, that's where you get a right fertile ground for corruption to kind of breed. And apparently some of the issues that will feed into that but not cause it, or some of the things that will manifest as a result of the corruption, are some of the things that we actually argue are the causes, such as poverty, inequality, extravagance, like greed, or kind of, when you have these like rich people or royal families or whatever that are extremely extravagant in the way that they spend money, or the lifestyle that they have. These are not actually, according to this researcher, causes of corruption, but these are signs that corruption is already manifest. And it's down to basically a lack of morality amongst the leaders. Back to you, Howard.
Thanks, Carla, for clarifying that. And also, the degree of corruption is related to the degree of power you have. The more power you have, the more corrupted you can do to the other people, the more corrupted you can be. So I want to ask this question to Matilda about human hunger for power, because for the past 100 years, writers warned us about power that could corrupt those who achieve it, or who inherit this kind of power. So could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think behind every corruption is a balance of power. Now, I want to ask you this question, and I want listeners to think about this. What fuels a person's lust for power? Well, lots of philosophers, theologians, historians, psychologists, sociologists, even economists thought about this concept. Is it ethical issue? Is it something native to humanity that is, very inhuman? And there are some answers that I think it can be relevant to all the root of the corruptions. At certain level, if they're not very rich, at certain level is the desire for material riches. Like they want to have more properties, more wealth. And once they have that, then there is another type. It's the craving, and it's very important, the childhood, because this is where it comes very important. The craving for respect, the craving for adoration. They wanted to be adored and praised. Like Napoleon Bonaparte, that's what his point was. He didn't care about the money. He just cared people adored him. And when you look at his childhood, he had issues with his parents. So that's where maybe your childhood and how you grew up is very important. Is also the desire to attain autonomy, the desire to control over other human beings. These are needs. And maybe right now I'm Matilda without any money, without any power. I'm very humanitarian. I don't know if Matilda has all the power and a lot of authority what Matilda can act. So we don't know exactly how even ourselves gonna govern if we have that kind of a authority, because certain things comes out, and it's mostly related to your childhood, like childhood trauma.
That's very interesting. I want to ask you this question, guys. If you have now a power to lead, and you have all the power, and you are a leader now, how would you deal with that? Would you deal with that positively? How you imagine yourself as a leader if you have all the power? Simon?
I wouldn't want all the power. I don't think anybody, absolute power corrupts, even though it says in Batman, but it's true. Because when you're making judgments, you need people to question what your judgment is and why. Do you understand?
Yeah.
If you're purging, that's another thing, purge. But after that, now you've got to sit down with people and think. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
To me, it's like that. That's the problem. When you got like that commander-in-chief that the Yanks talk about, or, you know, even when you got the China thing, they're extremes, and they may be seen at opposite ends, but you still end up with the same problem. A man wakes up tomorrow in America and says, no more Muslims. A man wakes up tomorrow in China and says something of the equivalent. And no one can do anything about it. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're going to have issues.
Yeah. I'm seeing Carla is smiling. You have something to add?
I was thinking, I was thinking about the issue of morality, and it's quite interesting because I'm British and I've traveled around the world, and, you know, I had exposure to different cultures because of my background, but I can never think about these subjects without thinking about religion. And I think maybe that's because I came from a religious background. And when you said that, I was instantly thinking about how Plato argued. Plato was a philosopher, but Plato argued for a form of governance that was based on wisdom. And wisdom, the only place that I know where wisdom was ever defined or where it was celebrated in a ruler was in the Bible, funnily enough. And I know that we've become really detached from religion in a lot of countries now, but actually, I think of it from King Solomon. Yeah. And anyone who's, I think if you're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or whatever, you know about King Solomon, or as Arab people may call him, Suleiman. And he was celebrated as the world's greatest king for a long time. And he ruled from around 970 BC to 931 BC, like that kind of era. And he was always used as a model ruler. And so when you said that, I thought straight away, if I was ever in that position, I would probably study the example of King Solomon and find out what it was that made him such a great ruler. But actually, I think I could stick my neck out there and say what it was is that King Solomon, this person respected the idea of a supreme authority. And I think that's where morality comes into it, because if you don't respect the idea of a supreme authority, and an authority that has the power to either put you in your kingdom or remove you from your kingdom, then I don't think you can ever be truly wise. I think if as a human being, you think that you're the ultimate source of power, then that's a hotbed for corruption. And that's where the issue of immorality really comes into play, is where you don't respect a higher power, or what we call a god, or the god, the one God. And I know people will argue against that, particularly people who don't believe in God or don't believe in religion. But we have to remember also that the Bible is not just a book about religion. It's also a chronology of the history of the early kings of the world. So it's a history of humankind. So I would have to look there. I probably would be praying a lot, and I would probably be reading the story of King Solomon if I was in that position, because I wouldn't have a clue. That's the truth.
Yeah.
Back to you, Howla.
Interesting. Matilda wants to say something. Go ahead.
I wanna give you guys a thought, something to think about, and I've done some research about it and also thought about it, and it came a little bit shocking that morality, not necessarily, like, we're still the same animal. We look at 1,000 years ago, our ethics and morals hasn't changed much, and I'm going to explain why. We have technology, we invented lots of amazing things, medicine, and I don't know, lots of things we invented. But what about our morality? And I think our morality and energy is connected together. Example, thousands of years ago, when Roman Empire, we had a lot of slaves. Right now, it's not beneficial financially, economically, to have that kind of slaves. It's more expensive. 1 barrel of oil can do a lot of job, machines can do a lot of job for us. Now we sit here and say, oh, slavery is bad, but is it really bad? Or if economically doesn't make sense, if it's really bad, why we still have slavery in some parts of the world? I mean, right now it's Women's Day and we have a lot of sex slaves and nobody is stopping them. Why? Because it's beneficial. So I don't know if morality, we are more moral. Maybe we are thinking this way because of how we have some machines doing our job, and economically, for example, this morality of it makes sense for us. It benefits us. So I think at the end of the day, we are humans how the animals are living. Or we wear expensive and fancy clothes, but it's all about balance of power. It's how animals live, and our morality, I don't know if religion gives us morality, maybe, but why a lot of religious people, and they've done a lot of big corruption in the world. If religion could have helped us to think better, why have they done crazy things to other humans?
Because they're not applying it. They're not applying it, Matilda. That's why. Because they and use it to justify corruption rather than using it to really as a mirror to reflect the state of themselves as an individual and how they should act, rather than what they can how they can use it. And we know this because we know from our background, from the Jamaican side of my family, we learned about how religion was used to justify slavery. And my dad used to always use this example. He used to say, when they went to take the slaves, they went with the whip in one hand and the Bible in another. And they used one scripture in the Bible saying, be in subjection to your masters, for it is righteous in the Lord, to justify the enslavement of thousands of people over several generations. But they completely ignored the scriptures where it said to love your fellow man as yourself. But then later, when they were challenged on that and that was put in front of them when it came to the abolition, they said that they weren't men, right? That was the argument. Well, it says love your fellow man as yourself, but I don't have to love him because he's not a man. And that's crazy. That's really crazy. But that's an answer to your question, because they don't use it the way it's meant to be used.
But maybe the need for power is so huge in us as a human being that we forget religion, we forget even like good people. How many of us know that, one person was very modest and humble, and once they had money and some power, the character has changed. So maybe I'm not saying it's absolute, but I'm just trying to give you guys a way to think. Maybe the way that we think of morality came, and we are very moral and we are very humble, we are like this because we don't have the position to control other people. Once we have it, then we might change.
But I would say, Matilda, it's different people, different things. And sadly, usually in politics, the bad people get to the top. Do you see what I mean? But human nature over the years has not changed. Regardless of our technology, the human nature is still the same. It's like a teacher in a class. The classes change every year, but you still got the same kind of students. You've got the funny student, the sad student, the angry student, the fat student, the lazy student. And it's the same thing with the game of politics. And sometimes you get a good student who represents everybody, and other times, more than likely, sadly, you get a bad student, a bad politician who, treats us all in a bad way, and revolution comes in, and we cut their head off, and all the rest of it. But yeah.
And I agree with you guys. A lot of politicians, they use religion or they use other terms of principle or ethics to hide the corruption that they have. So Frederick wrote a comment. He said, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if a leader, he has an infinite access to power, he can corrupt easily without being seen. Over to you, Carla, to read the rest of the comments.
Yeah, we've got some comments in agreement with Matilda's comments there about power and the role that power has to play in it. So Ada says, yes, Matilda, just for a power is the key for what's happening in the world. So she agrees that it's this kind of craving after power that some human beings have. Sasha says, I think the biggest problem in the world is the morality of the taxi drivers in the UK. Sasha also says, excellent intervention, Matilda, about the explanation of the end of human slavery and the new machines, slaves with oil. That's an interesting phrase, slaves with oil. Back to you, Howla.
Yes, guys. So the last question I want to ask Victor, how we could prevent corruption? And if you guys want to jump in, feel free.
Well, let me just point out something to Sasha. I hope Sasha's listening good. Yeah. You complain about, wait a minute. You complain about corruption and you don't want it, but then you don't want to do what's necessary to clear it up. It's like someone who says, I'm being mugged, I'm being raped, but don't kill the person or punish them for what they're doing. It doesn't make sense. So you can sit there, come out with your comments. It's all very fancy, but you're going to have to put up with it. But there's someone like me who does your dirty work. But go on, Paola.
Fair enough. Next time.
It's true. It's like everybody says war is bad, but go and defend us from these people. So when we go and kill them, then they got a problem. Oh, you shouldn't have done it like that. Shut up. You weren't doing it, doing nothing to yourself in the first place. You know?
Now look what you've done, Sasha. Now look what you've done.
So, guys, how we could prevent corruption and all of this fraud and robbery?
I think what is keeping what is not helping, what is helping Nigeria, let me use Nigeria as a prime example. What is helping Nigeria right now is digitization of institutions right now. So they see less human intervention, because see, when there's money on the table, 90% of the time morality flies out of the window. So no matter how moral you are, but when there's money on the table, poof, you think of your kids, you think of the school fees, but now they're streamlining everything towards on the digital level. Digital infrastructures are being like deployed. You see, like the typical CCTV cameras now, whereby if when you get caught running down red lights, they are trying to digitize that right now. When you get stopped by a policeman, they know. So these are being digitized right now. So many of these corrupt practices that is going on, you see, like how would I say this now? Okay, let's take the typical. We've talked about driver's license. So now, if you want to like have a driver's license, I have one of my in-laws has a driving school, a big one. So now they are being standardized. So you need to show the work that this person has put in digitally. So every month you send it to them, to the standardization agency, and they get a copy of that. And mostly on when you do the practical test, you must have a CCTV camera there whereby it takes the picture. So when the time comes to like review your license, they go through all this stuff. So these are the little nuances that are being used to like stop corrupt practices right now, even in farming as well. So there was something that was deployed about 8 years ago to farmers on the rural areas. They now have not mobile phones, but this type of old 2G phones. So if they want fertilizers before it goes through different NGOs and bureaucracies and different hands, middlemen, and it doesn't get to the farmers. But right now, you go to the storage, you just get your token sent to your phone. You don't need any middleman. You just go there and get your stuff. So this has really stopped or reduced corruption in this aspect. So there are little digitized solutions that are being implemented right now that is working for us.
Yes, but digital solution will bring us technocrats leaders, and technocrats leaders, I don't know if we could trust them.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a technocratic government. So these people who are talking about robots being the government, it's actually not technocratic. It's one of the other forms of government, but it's just ruled by machines instead of human beings. But it would probably highly likely be a tyranny. And I think that's why people have this argument against the rise of the machines, as it's often called.
Now you're talking about Terminator 4 right?
It's a whole different topic. We will talk about it in Podcasters Unleashed. And I would love to, any final thoughts, guys, to share with the audience before we wrap it up?
I think that spirituality is very important. I think that an understanding of what you are and where you stand in the order of things, universal order. I don't mean the order of things in society, because quite often the place that society puts you in is not your place, if that makes sense. I think that your spirituality and how you practice that is very important. And religion does connect to that. And I'm not saying that religion is a solution to everything. And I know that religion is often used as a guise or as another way to be corrupt. But I do think that spiritual beliefs and having an awareness of the spiritual needs of a human make a difference. Because sometimes we pursue power, for example, because we're disconnected from what I would call God. We're disconnected from the source of our creation. And we dismiss the laws that were put in force for us before we got here. Your laws that human beings don't have a governance over. And I think keeping that in mind is really important when you're dealing with things like justice and corruption.
Yeah. Yes, Matilda.
I think entrepreneur spirit can help maybe a society to have a better middle class. And when you have more middle class, I think the corruption will be less and less, because at least the need to survive won't be there. So I'm with maybe capitalism and entrepreneur spirit. That's why I live in America. Woohoo!
God bless America. Okay, guys.
I would say quickly, if you cure world poverty, then you won't really have so much of a corruption problem. Because if everybody's on a minimum standard of living, then there's no real need for the corruption so much.
Okay.
Yeah, and also on the last note, if they can stop, no more AIDS to Africa, we don't want AIDS anymore. Yeah, just trade with us. We've got bigger brains than you guys, so trade with us. No more AIDS. There's nobody dying on the street here with hunger, so no more AIDS. So those big lobbying firms that wants to we're sending AIDS. No, we don't want AIDS anymore. Keep your AIDS and let's trade.
So when just to confirm, when Victor says AIDS, he doesn't mean HIV/AIDS. He means no more charity, no more all of those kind of things.
Okay.
Yeah, because it comes across like you're saying AIDS, and I know you're not saying AIDS. I agree with what you're saying, but it's not AIDS. You don't want no more charity.
Yeah, we don't want handouts anymore. Keep your handouts.
Yeah, no handouts. Yeah.
Africa is powerful, people.
God bless Nigeria. Yeah.
God bless all the countries.
Yeah.
We'll be neutral.
America.
Thank you guys for watching.
Not God.
Here you have all the solutions. We are not experts. We are here as a podcasters, and we discuss all topics. And we would love for you to tune in and to follow us on Instagram, Podcasters Unleashed, or on Facebook. And you can follow also each one of us on different podcast platforms. We have Simon, African Investor Stories, Carla, Wonder and Wellbeing, Matilda, Cafe with Matilda, and Victor, the Sport Entrepreneurs. We would love for you to support us and to follow us, and also to suggest new topics for us for next week. Thank you so much for listening.